A man from a suburb of fewer than 32,000 people built a drug empire so large that the Mexican cartel personally invited him across the border to lock in the partnership. He turned the invitation down, kept moving product, and for a few more months got away with it. This is a story of Rolando Williamson, better known on the streets of Alabama as Baldhead. Bessemer to Birmingham, how Baldhead built his name. Bessemer, Alabama sits southwest of Birmingham, a suburb of under 32,000 people that most people outside Alabama have never heard of. It is not a place that typically shows up in federal drug conspiracy indictments, but starting around 2013, it became the base of operations for one of the most far-reaching drug trafficking organizations the state had ever seen, led by a man born there named Rolando Williamson. On the streets, he went by Baldhead, sometimes Baldhead, sometimes Raw. He was not from money. There are no public records of a privileged upbringing, no mention of legitimate employment in any court document or press release covering his case. To understand how a man from a small Alabama suburb ends up directing a multi-million-dollar cartel-connected drug operation, it helps to understand what Alabama's drug landscape actually looked like at the time. People tend to picture the state as something slow and quiet, the kind of place where the drug problem is meth cooked in a trailer on a back road somewhere. The reality is considerably more organized. Alabama's methamphetamine supply, by the time Baldhead was running his operation, was coming almost entirely from the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, funneled through Atlanta, a city only an hour and a half from Huntsville, which served as the primary distribution hub for the entire Southeast. The DEA's own agents described Interstate 20 as the main thoroughfare for a cartel product entering Alabama. The proximity to Atlanta didn't just make supply chains efficient, it made prices drop. An ounce of methamphetamine that cost $200 just a few years prior had fallen to between $300 and $400 by the time law enforcement was analyzing trafficking trends in the state. More product moving faster at lower cost, which meant more volume was required to maintain the same level of revenue. That reality created both an opportunity and a demand for someone capable of managing large-scale distribution across the region, and Bessemer sat right at the edge of that supply line. Baldhead did not step into that role overnight. He started young, learning the mechanics of the drug trade from the streets. His first serious run-in with the law came in 2007 when he was charged with murder following a shooting at a party that left one man dead. He was in his early 20s. The case was dropped after about a month, and he walked back out onto the same streets. Whatever lesson he took from that experience, it did not push him toward a different path. It pushed him toward a more careful one. For years after that, Williamson remained a lower-level operator. Birmingham and the surrounding areas were under the control of a far more visible figure, Billy Williams Jr., known on the streets as Champ. Champ Williams ran the west side of Birmingham with the kind of grip that made him a local legend, dangerous enough that witnesses were too afraid to testify against him, and flashy enough that his lifestyle became a reference point for everyone watching from below. Retired FBI agent Greg Gart, who co-led the investigation into Williams, said that men like Champ become urban legends, and very few people are willing to speak against them out of fear. That reputation alone was enough to keep witnesses silent and keep his operation intact for years. It came apart in 2013 when a SWAT team hit his downtown Birmingham luxury condo. Williams was standing in nothing but his underwear when the door came down. In a last-ditch attempt to hide his cash, he threw fistfuls of $20, $50, and $100 bills out the 12th floor bathroom window. The money scattered in the wind and rained down onto the street below. A city bus driver, starting his morning shift, spotted the bills falling and scrambled to grab as much as he could before FBI agents rushed outside to recover what was left and bag it as evidence. Inside the condo, investigators found $167,000 in cash stacks, $175,000 in jewelry, including gold and diamond watches, 2 fur coats, a Corvette ZR1, a Cadillac CTS-V, and a Chrysler 300. Champ eventually pled guilty to running a cocaine and heroin trafficking network. In July 2014, a judge handed him just under 22 years in federal prison, later reduced to 19. He never gave up his cartel connections in Mexico. Even in custody, his reputation traveled with him. At one point, while being escorted past a group of defendants in a courtroom hallway, Champ stopped, held eye contact with each of them one by one, and said nothing. All 3 defendants decided to plead guilty before trial even started. Agent Gart said he had never seen anything like it in 23 years with the Bureau. No one could tell if the defendants were afraid of Williams or if the look in his eyes told them he would give them up the moment he took the stand. With Champ off the streets, there was a clear vacancy on Birmingham's west side. The expectation was that someone from inside his organization would move into that position and maintain the supply lines. That plan collapsed immediately. The family member who tried to fill the role was arrested for attempting to sell heroin to undercover agents before he could establish anything. That window was all Baldhead needed. He was already operational, already connected. He stepped into the vacancy with a clear structural vision. No more depending on someone else's supply chain, no more operating in another man's shadow. He cut direct ties with Mexican suppliers and began receiving large shipments of cocaine from cartel sources out of Monterrey, Mexico, specifically through a contact the street called Meme. He also sourced heroin from Detroit and built an entirely separate distribution pipeline for methamphetamine. His crew spanned western Jefferson County with stash houses in Bessemer and Homewood, trusted middlemen living inside his own residence, and distributors targeting markets along the US 280 corridor running southeast from Birmingham toward Auburn. The organization he built included at least 18 named co-conspirators, men and women playing defined roles across the operation. One of his distributors was a youth football coach with a standing reputation in the community for steering kids away from drug use, who was simultaneously moving weight for Baldhead on the side. By March 2013, the enterprise was formally underway. It would run for 6 uninterrupted years. The cartel connection, the invitation that could have ended everything. The title of this video is built around a single question. How did an Alabama street operator finesse the cartel? The answer to that question lives in 2019, during a period when Baldhead's relationship with his Mexican suppliers had grown far beyond a simple buyer-seller arrangement. By that point, he had been moving cocaine sourced from a Mexican cartel cell for years. The volume and consistency of those transactions had established him in the cartel's view as a high-value American partner, someone worth cultivating rather than simply supplying. So the cartel extended him an invitation. Come to Monterrey, ride motorcycles, spend time together, and cement the relationship in person. On the surface, it looked like an acknowledgement of his value. In practice, the cartel had a different calculation running underneath it. Baldhead was suspicious immediately. Years of operating in a business where trust is the rarest commodity and betrayal is the most common outcome had trained him to read invitations carefully. This one had weight to it that he couldn't ignore. He didn't dismiss it outright. The cartel was his supply line, and antagonizing them was its own kind of risk. But he did not commit to going. What confirmed his suspicion came from a Mexican associate who was also based in Bessemer and who had his own direct experience with how the cartel dealt with American traffickers it decided were worth more as hostages than as clients. This associate had been through it himself. Kidnapped by cartel members after being deported back to Rosa, Mexico, a border town across from Hidalgo, Texas, he was held until his father sold the family home to scrape together a $20,000 ransom. That was the rate for him. For Baldhead, a known American operator moving significant volume, someone the cartel already knew was generating millions, the ransom figure they had settled on was $100,000. The associate explained it plainly. The trip to Monterey was not an invitation. It was the setup. Once Baldhead crossed into Mexico, the cartel would take him, hold him, and make contact with whoever in the United States was closest to him for the payout. Declining the trip was the only move that kept him alive and free. Baldhead took the warning and stayed put in Alabama. He turned down the Monterey trip and kept running his operation from Bessemer, continuing to move product through the same cartel supply chain he had built. This is what the title refers to as the finesse. He had not run a scheme against the cartel, had not stolen from them, had not violated their terms. He had simply read their intentions clearly enough to avoid becoming their next collection target, while maintaining the business relationship long enough to keep the supply moving. The cartel lost the opportunity to extract a $100,000 ransom from one of their most productive American distributors, and Baldhead walked away, having never set foot across the border. The same associate who delivered that warning also painted the picture of exactly how brutal the cartel's enforcement practices were. In that same June 2019 recorded conversation, he described a separate incident. After being deported back to Rosa, a truck had pulled up beside him on the street. The vehicle matched the description of one Baldhead drove. It was not Baldhead inside, it was cartel members already moving to grab him again. He escaped. His cousin was less fortunate. Robbed of a drug shipment in Atlanta, the cousin ended up owing a debt to the cartel that he could not pay back. The cartel went looking for a family member in Mexico to use as leverage. The only surviving relative, the grandfather, had already died before they could find him. These were not hypotheticals. This was the operating environment Baldhead was navigating in real time. A supply chain managed by an organization that kidnapped its own business partners, pursued relatives across international borders as collateral, and treated unpaid debts as personal offenses punishable by death. The fact that he identified the threat, declined the trap, and continued operating, all while maintaining the appearance of a functioning business relationship, reflects a level of street intelligence that is easy to underestimate when all you see is the end result: a man sentenced to life in prison. The irony that crystallized over the following weeks is this: the man who warned Baldhead about the cartel's kidnapping scheme, the same associate who laid out every detail of how they operated and what they intended, was at that very moment cooperating with federal investigators and recording every word of that conversation. The Wire: how the feds built the case from the inside out. The cartel invitation, the kidnapping warning, the associate's own ransom story, the $100,000 figure, every detail of that conversation was on tape. By the time that June 2019 meeting happened, the FBI's North Alabama Safe Streets Task Force had already been running surveillance on Williamson's operation for the better part of a year. The case against him was being built from multiple angles simultaneously, and Baldhead had no idea how deep inside his circle the investigation had already gone. In October 2018, FBI Special Agent Wayne Gerhardt installed 2 pole cameras positioned to cover the front and back of Williamson's Bessemer residence. The cameras ran continuously, recording soundless footage from public sightlines for 10 straight months through the summer of 2019. What they captured was a steady pattern of vehicles arriving, people entering and leaving, transactions conducted in the open, and the kind of traffic volume that told investigators exactly what they already suspected. The footage was used to identify associates, map the rhythm of the operation, and build the evidentiary foundation needed to obtain search warrants. When Williamson later challenged the surveillance on Fourth Amendment grounds, the 11th Circuit ruled the footage was admissible. The cameras had captured nothing that wasn't already visible from a public street. The poll cameras gave investigators the pattern. The controlled buys gave them the proof. In April 2019, a cooperating witness purchased half an ounce of cocaine from co-conspirator Ishmael Gregory, known as C, for $650. That single transaction gave agents enough to apply for wiretap authorization. Once the wire was active on Gregory's phone, calls began producing evidence in volume. Gregory discussing a $30,000 debt owed for a methamphetamine supply, calls arranging additional cocaine sales, conversations that tied Williamson directly to the financial and logistical core of the entire network. The wiretap was then extended to cover co-conspirator Adrian Taylor, known as Slim, whose own controlled buys had generated 2 ounces of meth in April and 3 more ounces in June. At the same time, agents were pulling trash from Williamson's property, going through discarded material from outside his home, and recovering drug paraphernalia that gave them additional grounds for search warrant applications. Intercepted calls captured Williamson himself on the line, discussing drug stock, assessing the quality of incoming marijuana shipments, and coordinating deliveries. One call that agents documented referenced a cup of ice, which investigators identified as slang for an ounce of methamphetamine. Then came the informant's direct access. In June 2019, a confidential informant visited Williamson's home and purchased a sample of heroin mixed with fentanyl inside the residence itself. The visit was captured by the poll cameras already running outside, and the transaction was corroborated by the informant's own recording equipment. During the same period, informants reported seeing a custom $30,000 gold raw pendant, one of Williamson's personalized pieces, inside his Homewood apartment on Oaks Drive, along with cash and drugs stored in bulk. The depth of access investigators had achieved by mid-2019 was substantial. They had exterior surveillance footage spanning 10 months, recorded controlled transactions from 2 separate co-conspirators, phone intercepts capturing drug logistics in Williamson's own voice, informant purchases from inside his residence, and physical evidence pulled from his trash. Any one of those pieces would have been enough for a warrant. Together, they formed the backbone of what would eventually become a 58-count federal superseding indictment. But the piece that held everything together, the one that gave investigators not just evidence of transactions, but a window into Williamson's decision-making, his supplier relationships, and the internal dynamics of his entire organization, was the courier who had flipped. One of his trusted drug couriers agreed to cooperate with federal authorities and began secretly recording conversations. This was the same person Williamson trusted enough to discuss the cartel's Monterey invitation with, the same person his Mexican associate had warned him about the kidnapping through. He had no idea the man was wired. The June 11, 2019 recorded meeting between Baldhead and the courier captured him discussing cutting ties with his cousin over suspected disloyalty, laying out his strategy for targeting high-income customers along the US 280 Southeast corridor between Birmingham and Auburn, referencing his cartel supplier Meme in Monterey, and hearing out the full details of the kidnapping warning, all while the courier transmitted every word to federal investigators. The man who had helped him dodge the cartel's trap had simultaneously handed the government the rope it needed to close the case. The takedown, raids, arrests, and what they found. By August 2019, the FBI had accumulated nearly a year of surveillance, Multiple rounds of controlled buys, intercepted phone calls, informant recordings, and trash pools. The infrastructure of the case was solid. Agents moved on August 22nd. The North Alabama Safe Streets Task Force arrested Rolando Williamson in the parking lot of a Publix grocery store in Homewood on the morning of August 26, 2019. He was behind the wheel of a 2016 Dodge Hellcat worth approximately $80,000. When agents approached the vehicle, Williamson had 2 loaded pistols on him, additional loaded magazines, and was carrying close to $14,000 in cash. The arrest itself was clean, no chase, no standoff. The complexity came next when investigators moved simultaneously on his properties. At his Bessemer residence on Arlington Avenue, agents recovered digital scales, plastic bags, marijuana, methamphetamine, and a pistol. The Homewood apartment on Oaks Drive produced a considerably more significant haul: 5.7 kilograms of marijuana, 135 grams of a fentanyl and heroin mixture, 4 firearms, 1,400 rounds of ammunition, $95,000 in cash, and $45,000 in jewelry. Jefferson County Sheriff's Office units running coordinated searches at additional stash locations tied to Williamson recovered 100 pounds of marijuana, 133 grams of heroin, 540 grams of methamphetamine, and 112 grams of cocaine across those properties, along with multiple handguns and rifles. The total inventory across all locations added up to 366 grams of heroin and fentanyl, 109 grams of cocaine, 573 grams of pure methamphetamine, 52 kilograms of marijuana, over $97,000 in cash, and more than 1,700 rounds of ammunition. Federal investigators described the fentanyl seized as representing 75,000 potential lethal doses, a figure that gave some concrete dimension to the human cost of what had been flowing through those stash houses and into the streets of western Jefferson County. Williamson's arrest was not announced publicly right away. The federal investigation needed time to build the wider net before tipping off the remaining co-conspirators. That window closed in late October. On October 29, 2019, a federal grand jury returned a 58-count superseding indictment charging Williamson and 17 co-defendants with conspiracy to distribute heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, methamphetamine, and marijuana, continuing criminal enterprise, firearm offenses, and multiple counts of using communication facilities to facilitate drug trafficking. All other co-defendants were arrested on November 13, 2019. The indictment alleged drug activity spanning March 2013 through August 2019, 6 years of continuous operation. Among the 18 charged were Ishmael Khalid Gregory, C., Hendarius Lamar Archie, Hen, Adrian Hiram Taylor, Slim, Leanthony Martez Gillens, Fat Man, Eric Dion Daniel, E., Sertarius Arzavia Lee, Sir, Janiyah Lenise Bibb, and over 10 additional co-conspirators, each occupying a distinct role in a distribution structure that had been moving product across the Southeast for years. The indictment sought initial forfeiture of approximately $10 million in profits and assets, including vehicles and jewelry. In the end, prosecutors would prove far more. 14 of the 18 defendants entered guilty pleas before the case reached trial. Williamson did not. He took it all the way. Trial, sentencing, and the judge who wasn't buying it. A week-long federal trial in April 2022 before U.S. District Judge Anne Marie C. Axon in Birmingham put everything the government had assembled over 3 years in front of a jury: poll camera footage, intercepted phone calls, recorded controlled buys, informant testimony, physical evidence from raids across multiple properties, and testimony from the people who had moved drugs inside Williamson's network for years. Former associates Isaiah Thomas, Eric Daniel, and Derek Bland took the stand and described in detail what it looked like from the inside. They had served as middlemen, reselling Williamson's product in the streets, some of them living at his residence and working out of his properties, for 5 and 6 years at a time. They described kilogram quantities of cocaine and heroin stored at his stash houses, not grams, kilograms, and regular weekly deliveries of marijuana to co-conspirators like Hendarius Archie. The testimony from inside the organization corroborated everything the wiretaps and poll cameras had captured from the outside. The entire case assembled itself in the courtroom like a completed puzzle. Trial witnesses testified that Williamson had distributed hundreds of kilograms of cocaine across the 6-year conspiracy, along with 24 kilograms of heroin, 10 kilograms of methamphetamine, and 20,000 pounds of marijuana. Those numbers represent the scale of what witnesses placed at trial, far beyond the threshold amount specified in the indictment, which had already charged him with distributing 1 kilogram or more of heroin, 40 grams or more of fentanyl, 5 kilograms or more of cocaine, and 100 kilograms or more of marijuana. The indictment's thresholds were floor figures. The testimony put the actual volume in an entirely different category. On April 18, 2022, the jury convicted Williamson, Taylor, Gregory, and Archie on all counts. Williamson was found guilty of leading a continuing criminal enterprise, conspiracy to distribute all 5 drug types, using and carrying firearms during drug trafficking, and multiple telephone counts. 3 of the 4 defendants who stood trial were convicted of the core conspiracy charges. The 4th, Archie, was also convicted of the firearm count alongside Williamson. The charge that defined the case and set the ceiling on the sentence was the Kingpin Statute, 21 U.S.C. Paragraph 848. This is not a routine drug trafficking charge. The federal government reserves it for individuals who occupy the top position in a substantial and continuous drug enterprise and who have organized, supervised, and managed 5 or more other people in connection with a series of drug violations. A conviction under this statute carries a mandatory life sentence once 3 or more serious drug felonies are established. 14 of the 18 defendants had already pled guilty before trial, which itself spoke to what they understood about the evidence. Williamson forced the issue. The jury answered it. What happened in the lead up to sentencing was a final attempt to shift the frame. Friends and family members sent letters to Judge Axon describing Williamson not as a drug kingpin, but as a generous man, someone who used his money to help people in his community, who cared about the people around him, who was more than what the government's case suggested. The letters painted the picture that defense teams always attempt before sentencing: a full human being, not just the sum of his charges. Judge Axon heard those letters and addressed them directly during the hearing. She made clear that what troubled her was not the defense's argument, but the message Williamson's operation had sent to everyone around him, specifically the young men and women who had watched him move through the world as a man of means, funded entirely by drug sales. She told him that her concern was that he had left those people with the impression that selling drugs is acceptable so long as the proceeds are used generously. She then reminded everyone in the courtroom that the money Williamson had spent freely on people he cared about had a source, and that source had caused tremendous harm to real people, particularly those who had received his fentanyl. On August 9, 2022, Judge Axon sentenced Rolando Williamson to life in federal prison, plus an additional 120 months. He was 37 years old. The court also entered a money judgment of $15,000 against him. The government's verified calculation of gross proceeds generated by the enterprise over its 6-year run. Forfeiture orders stripped him of a $46,000 Ford F-250 Kings Ranch, a $37,000 Cadillac Escalade, over $100,000 in cash, $45,000 in jewelry, and every firearm and round of ammunition seized during the investigation. The co-defendant sentences told the same story. Adrian Taylor received life. Ishmael Gregory received 480 months, 40 years. LeAnthony Gillens received 232 months. Hendarius Archie received 169 months. Janiah Bibb received 40 months. By August 24, 2022, all 18 defendants in the indictment had been sentenced. Williamson appealed. In February 2025, the 11th Circuit upheld his conviction and life sentence, vacating only a lesser included conspiracy count that was redundant alongside the CCE conviction, a technical correction that left the outcome entirely unchanged. He filed a petition to the U.S. Supreme Court challenging the poll camera surveillance on Fourth Amendment grounds, arguing that the 10-month warrantless recording of his home's exterior violated constitutional protections established in Katz versus United States and Carpenter versus United States. As of May 2026, the court has not ruled on the petition. The $36 million money judgment is its own testament to what this operation represented at scale. The 3-year OCDETF investigation that brought Williamson down involved the FBI, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, and the Bessemer Police Department. U.S. Attorney Prim Escalona described the outcome as removing a supply network that had driven addiction, violence, and economic harm across the region for years. FBI Special Agent in charge Johnny Sharp called it a decisive blow against the trafficking network. Sheriff Mark Petway said the convictions were among the most significant drug enforcement outcomes Jefferson County has seen. On the streets, people drew a comparison between what happened when Champ Williams was taken down and what happened when Baldhead was taken down. When Champ went away, the vacuum created room for someone else, and Baldhead filled it. When Baldhead went away, no comparable figure emerged to take the territory. Where Champ's fall left a void, Baldhead's left a hole. The distinction is a measurement of how much larger his operation had grown and how much more deeply it had embedded itself into the supply infrastructure of the region. He finessed the cartel. He saw the trap before it closed. He turned down the trip to Monterey and kept his freedom for a few more months. But the wire was already running, the informant was already inside, and the cameras had been watching for almost a year before that conversation ever happened. The finesse worked. The investigation already had everything it needed.